I hope your choice of snack and or drink is good because we are discussing plot today. This video is part 2 of a short series I'm making to point new writers in the right direction to help alleviate the stress caused by ambiguous problems. I recommend watching my first one on characters first. More than any other area of storytelling, plot is the thing that is most hotly argued about in terms of the writing craft. To some, plot is boring and should only be the emotional movement of characters. To others, plot is the only thing that truly matters and all other parts of a story only exist to serve the plot. Still others think plot is literally the devil and should be completely ignored. Today, I'm going to talk about plot in a way intended for newer writers to grasp intuitively, but first I need to make some terms clear to avoid confusion later on. When I say story, I'm referring to a complete story. This includes plot, characters, world, and the actual written words on the page or images on the screen. Some people refer to plot as story, but for the purposes of this video, when I say plot, I mean the sequence of events in a story, and story refers to the whole thing. I already said that plot is the sequence of events in a story, but that doesn't necessarily mean chronological order of those events in a story. It is just the events of the story in the order they are presented. This allows plots that move around in time by means of flashbacks and the like, or stories that are told completely out of chronological order. Even then, certain events that serve certain purposes are going to be in the spot where those purposes are most effective, which we will refer to as beats. The beats are the mounting points of the plot. They are the major emotional or otherwise significant changes that move the plot into a new section. With all of that out of the way, let's begin the real part of our discussion with the pieces and parts all good plots are going to have. Firstly, there will be a meaningful connection to the main character. I said in my last video that the main plot of a story cannot just be a side quest for the main character. On the plot side of things, making the plot of a story tightly connected to the main character automatically makes it more interesting. You want your readers or audience to be invested in the story. Well, they experience the story through the main character or cast. If the plot is just another day in the character's life or unrelated to their motives, fears, and desires, the readers and audience are also going to feel a disconnect and lose interest. The remedy is to make sure the main plot is the character's primary focus. It has their attention, it promises the answers to their questions, and is equipped with obstacles specially made to force the character to make hard decisions. Once that is ensured, you will automatically notice your character's development soar. They can be fully utilized in a plot designed to test them to their limits, so they will have ample potential to experience changes in their attitudes, opinions, and emotions. As long as you make the most of every ounce of that potential, your readers and audience will find the story far more interesting than if it was just another day in the life. If you want proof, look at Doctor Who. There have been a lot of episodes of the show, and by nature of who the Doctor is as a character, episodes would almost certainly be just a day in the life. But notice how every liked episode leans into what makes the Doctor and companions tick, and how every disliked episode seems forgettable to the characters themselves. If the characters care about the plot, and the characters are well designed, I can guarantee the readers or audience will automatically be more endeared to the story than if it wasn't the case. The next part every plot needs is an antagonistic force. What that force is depends on the genre, but its presence is mandatory regardless. For an action-adventure, it's the big bad and their henchmen. For a romance, it's all the things keeping the couple apart. For the crime drama, it's either the criminals or the police and other criminals. You get the point. Stories fail without conflict, and the plot provides the conflict by means of making sure the antagonistic force is a constant, oppressive factor the main characters have to learn to overcome. Imagine a superhero movie where the villain is defeated 10 minutes in. What happens after? Well, nothing interesting. It may be tempting to have quick resolutions or victories, especially if the story is a thinly disguised power fantasy, but always remember that the antagonistic force is what keeps people invested. The aforementioned power fantasy is often a writer's first project. After all, every person ever has imagined how great it would be if they were given the ability to make all of their problems go away instantly. Win the promotion instead of that annoying guy. Be praised as the star athlete of the best team. Save the person you love from danger in the most badass way. Maybe all of that on the same day. To the person imagining it in the moment, it feels exciting and fun. But if you put it on a page, it doesn't work. Like, not even close. Why? In a power fantasy, there may be an antagonistic force, but that is meaningless if it's weaker than the protagonist. That is because the protagonist needs to grow and develop. And let's be honest, people can't grow at anything until they understand the need to grow, which only happens when something reminds them how far they still have to go. Make sure you don't confuse an antagonistic force stronger than the character with world-ending antagonists are the way to go. I won't get too much into it, but simply put, if you don't give the readers or audience reason to personally care about the antagonistic force, they won't. A protagonist winning against their bad manager is more satisfying than a protagonist saving the entire universe, if the story makes sure I personally dislike that bad manager as much as the protagonist. The main element of all of that is movement. Ultimately, that's what plots are about. The movement from beginning to end should also lead the movement of protagonists rising to the occasion and antagonists meeting them head-on. Plots with no movement create stories with no meaning whatsoever. It's as simple as that. Finally, and this is the most crucial step of all, write a thesis statement. Screenwriters will call this a logline. Write a single sentence that says what the story is. It will be formatted something similar to, it's about an adjective protagonist who must do a thing before an antagonistic force ruins everything. I mean, they'll all be different, but the point is that this one sentence should have the protagonist, the antagonist, the theme, the setting, and what needs to happen. While you write, make sure everything you write serves this single sentence. Plus, if you have to pitch this idea, you pitch this sentence first. The next topic is the structure of plot. Now that you know some of the most important things that go into a plot, it shouldn't be too surprising why most plots seem to follow very similar shapes. Even if you set out to invent your own structure, you'll quickly discover that successful plots will tend to make similar structural moves. Therefore, the least stressful and yet most productive way to go about structure is to do some research on the structures that work best for your preferred genre, find the one that suits your writing style the most, and then make the necessary adjustments to it. It'll save you countless hours in drafts that will lead you to the same conclusion anyway. There are different methodologies to building your plot. I'm not going to pretend that any writer's serious attempt at a story starts with putting together a plot in a rigid sense. After all, when you want to write a story, it's probably because you thought of a character archetype you like and then scenes that would work for them. You may even have a loose idea of the arc they should follow, but don't let them simmer in your head until you start writing. Bad idea. You'll inevitably get hung up on writer's block and continuity errors, and that's assuming a purely mental plot even gets that far. Let's talk about how to correct these issues before they come up to save yourself immense stress. You probably know about the 3-act structure. You may also know about the 5-act structure. For now, let's stick with 3-act structure. The most common methodologies I hear about are the hero's journey and Dan Harmon's story circle. There is also Blake Snyder's beat sheet and the densely packed information of Robert McKee's book, Story. I want this video to help writers who haven't worked with any methodologies before, so today let's stick with Harmon's circle and Snyder's beat sheet. Once you know how these two work, you'll be able to figure out Hero's Journey, and if you decide to read McKee's book, I do recommend it as it is rich in story writing information, you'll understand it easier. Let's start with Snyder's beat sheet because I think it's the most conventional. Please note that it was designed for screenwriting for movies, so the structure for episodes of a series or the structure for novels will be somewhat different. But the principles are close enough that you should intuit the changes you need to make accordingly. The beat sheet looks like this. A beat is a scene or moment that determines the scenes or situations that follow it. So while a lot of movies have roughly 40 scenes, you can generally find these 15 beats that guide everything else. The opening image is as simple as what the story opens with. This should be a strong introduction of the setting, character, and rules of the world. Is your protagonist a gambler down on his luck? You open on him playing poker and losing. Is your world a dystopia run by a cheese cult? Show the cheese people being oppressive. The idea is that all of the most important information you need the reader or audience to know should be readily available. The theme stated is going to refer to a line of dialogue very soon after the beginning that references what the core of the story is going to be. Generally, this won't be the protagonist who says it. Maybe it's a moral dilemma, maybe it's a wish, maybe it's a plea for help, you get the point. The setup isn't a specific moment, but rather the main problem Act 1 is introducing that determines all of the protagonist's goal for the rest of the story. Blake Snyder calls the next beat the catalyst. You're probably more familiar with the term inciting incident. they are synonymous. It's the thing that happens that allows the rest of the plot to happen. Someone important dies, the antagonist force comes closer than ever before, the couple meet for the first time. The debate is when the protagonist is about to react to the inciting incident. They are weighing the consequences and trying to figure out what move has the best outcome and if it's worth the risk. Do they fight back? Do they join a group? And so on. The break into two just means that this starts the Act 2 of a 3-act story. Crucially, it's when the protagonist makes the decision they were just debating about. The B story is, well, the B story. Every new writer seems to put their main plot here. Don't fall for it. The main plot is the A story. The B story is the other story involving possibly minor characters. It will be closely related to the A story, but remember, it's the other one. In stories that are not romances, this is usually a romantic subplot. In romances, this can be some other romantic plot happening in the background or it's something entirely different. Snyder calls this next part fun and games. I find that term a little misleading depending on the genre. Snyder himself has a better name for it in Save the Cat, which is Promise of the Premise. Whatever is the thing people expect to see in the story goes here, and it takes place throughout Act 2. It's the journey, the lessons, the ups and downs of the story. It's the entree. Is your story about a guy making counterfeit shoes to support his gambling problem? This is that guy making counterfeit shoes to support his gambling problem. The midpoint is called the midpoint because it happens near the middle. It's more helpful to think of this as a turning point. Snyder points out that the midpoint is best when it's either a false victory or a false defeat. For example, if your character thinks she wants to take over control of a factory when she actually wants to save her coworkers from losing their jobs, this is the part she takes over the factory and falsely thinks she's already won. From this point forwards, the rest of Act 2 is proving the fight isn't done yet. That starts with this step. Bad guys close in is when the antagonistic force that was thought to be handled in the midpoint is revealed to still be present, and they have a victory here. Her protagonist is going to have to back down a little to reorient themselves. The all is lost moment is when that doesn't work. Your protagonist should experience a fairly decisive loss here. If you're going to have an emotional death scene, here's the best place to put it. Snyder calls it the whiff of death. I just like that quote. The dark night of the soul is when your protagonist is reflecting on the defeat and the beat above. They should feel like there's no way forwards and that they've already lost. This is all about the protagonist having to look at failure in the eyes and contemplate it. We've reached the break into 3. This is the moment Act 3 begins. Like the break into 2, this must be a decision made by the protagonist. You know, they've come up with a new plan, they've heard the pep talk and had an idea, or they simply decide if they're going to lose, they won't be the only loser. The finale is the climax. Whatever thing completes the protagonist's entire journey is, it happens here. Happy ending or not, this is the moment it comes to fruition. I don't have much to say about it because I think this is probably the most obvious one. The last beat is the closing image. This is supposed to have some relational quality to the opening image, as it is supposed to show the growth and change that has occurred since the beginning. In other words, this is the scene that proves everything that happened was worth reading or watching. Now that you know what everything is, put the things you know about your story in the appropriate spots. Now you know where the holes are that you need to figure out before you start writing. Look at that thesis or logline you wrote earlier. Look at the spots you've already filled out, and figure out the scenes that fit those holes best. If you're writing a book, or a series, or an episode of a series, you might need to make some adjustments to the beat sheet's format, but hopefully you get the gist enough that you won't have any trouble with it. Now, let's say you are writing episodes of a series. This next format is absolutely for you. Why? It's Dan Harmon's Story Circle, which he developed around screenwriting for television. Originally, I was going to explain it before Snyder's beat sheet, but I think it's hard to understand without a basic knowledge and plot structure first. So now that you know Snyder's way, Harmon's way should be a piece of cake. Do you need to draw the circle? Technically no, but I recommend it to help you get used to it, so I'll draw it for you. Start with drawing a circle. Then draw a horizontal line through the middle. The top half is the familiar world. The bottom half is the unfamiliar world. Next, draw a vertical line through the middle. There is little agreement on what these two sides should be referred to as, but I personally call the right side unknowing and the left side knowing. Then do 2 diagonal lines to make 8 even slices. Clockwise from the top, the slices are called you, need, go, search, find, take, return, change. To hint at what some of this will do, Act 2 starts here, and Act 3 starts here. You start at you. This is the opening scene where you introduce the protagonist and the setting. Next, you establish what the protagonist needs, and if it conflicts with what they think they need, include that as well. This line is the equivalent of Snyder's break into 2 moment, and it is the decision the protagonist makes. Notice how we've left the familiar world and entered the unfamiliar world. The amount of conflict your protagonist is facing is increasing because whatever you're having them do, it is beyond what they've done before and they need to fight to understand and continue. Next is the search slice. Here is where your protagonist is starting to make progress getting what they want. This line here is Snyder's midpoint, which should make perfect sense because crossing it takes us to the knowing world. From here, your protagonist will know what they didn't understand before. The take slice is when the protagonist pays the price of whatever it is they acquired. It's the lesson they most needed to learn, and includes the bad guys closing in, All Is Lost, and Dark Night of the Soul from the beat sheet. The return slice is when the protagonist returns to the familiar world to begin the finale. They have survived the unfamiliar world, but paid the price for traversing it. Now they are equipped for the finale. The last slice is supposed to represent that the protagonist is now in a new place of comfort, but is now changed meaningfully because of all of their experiences. As you can tell, there are significant differences between the 2 systems, but I hope you can see just how related they are. You can convert plots from one to the other with ease. The hero's journey does the same, but I won't go into it because you probably get the point. Of course, all of these systems, including the ones I haven't mentioned, have received criticism. I will respond to the most common one I've personally heard. A lot of amateur writers stick their noses up at any of these patterns because they believe it stifles creativity. Their point is that original storytelling should avoid using anything like this and instead do something completely new and unseen. I could not disagree more. Stories written long before any of these systems will generally fit into them retroactively. The reason is because there are fundamental beliefs of cause and effect, rising to the occasion, and emotional satisfaction that a vast majority of readers and audience look for in every story they read or watch. Yes, you are free to write whatever you want. I don't judge. But don't be surprised when a completely off-the-wall project is widely disliked by the general public. Some writers might respond that they would take it as an honor to only be liked by the most extreme enthusiasts of their chosen art and disliked by the unknowledgeable public. Again, that's your choice, you are free to make. But I want to ask you a question. If you're purposely writing only for the most educated and artistically inclined readers or audience, then are you really furthering the art? Sure, art cinema and literary fiction have important places, but if you consider those to be the only worthy projects and more popular genres of film or writing to be lesser, you are deciding that a majority of the population doesn't deserve art or entertainment. If you're pretentious, then you will only cause damage to your art. Keep that in mind. But of course, I will concede that there is a worry to be addressed about plot structures generally being similar. Originality is very much still important. However, I wanted to stress that the solution is in the completed story. Your plot, once it is tightened, is the skeleton of your story. Humans have broadly similar skeletons, but we are all different. Stories are the same. Your originality is your characters and how they navigate the plot. Your originality is your world and how that flavors and powers the plot. Your originality is the experience that you, and only you, can create. That is your calling as a writer. You take what people know, and you make something new out of it. I'd like to take a moment to give my sincerest thanks for your support. I didn't expect the episode on characters to be so successful, and I'm truly touched by all of your feedback. Part 3 of this series of basic writing guidance will be on the very fun topic of world building. I hope to see you all there. Until then, have a good one.